Have you ever quietly asked yourself what it cost you to be so strong, so good, so unshakable? From a very young age, women have been taught that love must be earned through sacrifice, that softness is dangerous, that emotions are distractions, and that vulnerability is something to outgrow. But what if the very parts of you that you've spent your life hiding are the ones that once made you feel truly alive? Carl Jung said that the deepest pain is not caused by what happened to us, but by the parts of ourselves we had to leave behind in order to survive. Most women don't realize it, but somewhere along the way, they lost touch with a little girl, their original self. That girl was intuitive, emotional, radiant, and when she was silenced, so too was the foundation of their feminine energy. Jung believed that when the inner child remains repressed in the unconscious, the woman's true soul essence becomes caged. She may grow into someone admired, responsible, even powerful, but underneath it all, a deep sense of emptiness lingers. Because something essential was left in the dark. So how do you find her again? How do you awaken the little girl inside? The one who felt before she thought, who trusted before she feared. Jung left us with a path, but it is not a linear one. It is a spiral, a return, a descent into the places you stopped visiting long ago. The process of wholeness begins the moment you stop searching outside and start walking inward toward the part of you that was once left behind. There is a psychological mechanism that many women live with every day without realizing: the abandoned child. She doesn't cry out in ways you easily recognize. Instead, she shows up in your relationships, your reactions, your emotional fatigue. A woman might find herself constantly tired, in love, misunderstood by those around her, and overwhelmed by feelings that seem far too intense. But these reactions aren't weaknesses. They are echoes. Echoes from a time when that little girl's needs went unmet, and her voice unheard. Jung didn't believe the psyche was a single unit. He saw it as a vast inner landscape, a living terrain made up of the ego, the personal unconscious, and a deeper shared layer called the collective unconscious. Within that inner world live pieces of us we've hidden, memories, instincts, truths that were once too painful or too inconvenient to keep alive. The inner child is one of those sacred pieces. She doesn't vanish with age, she simply retreats into the shadows, carrying the weight of all that was once too much for her to bear. She hides, but she still governs your emotions. She still reacts when someone ignores your messages. She still panics when you feel unwanted. She still aches when someone disapproves of you. You may try to stay composed, smile, say you're fine, but she is the one flinching beneath your calm surface. And every time something reminds her of an old wound, she reacts, not in words but in surges of emotion. She remembers everything you were too young to understand. Jung called this the shadow, the part of our psyche that contains everything we've suppressed or rejected. And for many women, the inner child becomes the core of that shadow. She holds the fear of being abandoned, the belief that she's not enough, the pressure to please everyone just to be seen. These beliefs aren't born in adulthood. They're formed in the earliest moments, when a girl is told she's too sensitive, when her tears are ignored, when she's praised only for obedience, never for truth. To an adult, those might sound like small things. But to a child, they are defining. A child doesn't think, "My parent is emotionally unavailable." She thinks, "Something is wrong with me." And that belief takes root. It becomes a map. Be what others want and you'll be safe. Or show your true self and you'll be left behind. That unconscious rule becomes the foundation for how she lives, loves, and sees herself. This is why, even as adults, many women are trapped in patterns that make no sense on the surface. They fall for emotionally distant partners, just like the parent who never noticed them. They work for people who constantly criticize them, echoing the voice of a mother who always compared. These patterns don't happen by accident. Jung called it unconscious repetition, a looping script written by wounds that were never healed. The mind keeps recreating the pain, not to punish you, but to find resolution. It's as if the inner child keeps hoping. Maybe this time someone will stay. Maybe this time I'll be loved for who I am. But without awareness, the cycle repeats. You suffer, not because you're broken, but because a piece of you is still waiting to be seen, waiting to be chosen. And then there is the ego, that outer mask we wear to get through life. The ego says, I'm fine. Even when we're unraveling, it builds accomplishments, achievements, and identities. But when the inner child is still hurting, the ego turns from a tool into a shield. It creates a version of you that looks strong but feels hollow. You become independent because depending feels dangerous. You become successful because softness once led to shame. Imagine a woman in her 30s, polished, respected, admired. She leads meetings, earns well, checks every box. But when someone she loves pulls away, her world collapses. She spirals, not because she's weak, but because the love she craves isn't for the adult she is now. It's for the child who never got it then. She's not falling apart as a grown woman. She's grieving as a little girl. And maybe you see yourself in that story. Maybe part of you has always felt like something is missing, but you couldn't name it. Maybe this is the first time anyone's told you, the part you're missing is you. The child within, the real you before you became who the world needed you to be. Society teaches women to shape themselves to fit the mold. But Jung said, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration. You cannot become whole by abandoning the parts that feel inconvenient. The little girl inside is not a weakness. She is your beginning. And until she is embraced, your story remains unfinished. When you finally look at her, without judgment, without shame, and say, I know you're still hurting, something shifts. The unconscious no longer needs to act out in shadows. The buried pain loses its grip. And in that moment of recognition, your healing begins. Not with answers, but with presence. You don't need to fix the past. You just need to tell that girl, I hear you now. Because the truth is, no matter how much you build, succeed, or survive, if you leave her behind, something will always feel hollow. And when you return to her, your feminine essence, your softness, your wisdom, your depth starts to return with her. No one is born disconnected from their feminine essence. It is not something that must be created. It is something to return to. Feminine energy lives within us from the beginning, flowing like an underground spring. It carries the scent of intuition, the rhythm of emotion, the wisdom of stillness, the power of surrender. But the world rarely teaches women to protect this sacred force. Instead, they are taught to survive by tightening, hardening, and abandoning the softness that once made them whole. Over time, the world does not say, stop being feminine. It says, be practical. Be quiet. Don't be too much. It rewards steadiness over spontaneity, logic over emotion, strength over vulnerability. And the little girl who once danced barefoot in her imagination, who cried freely and laughed loudly, slowly learns to be careful. She becomes calculated. She learns to measure every word, and with each compromise, she moves farther from her true self. Carl Jung saw this as a spiritual loss. He called it detachment from the archetypal self, a gradual separation from one's origin, one's soul blueprint. He believed that the feminine is not just a personality trait, it is an archetype, a living energy that connects you to the great unconscious, to creativity, to depth. Jung called it Tema, the inner mystery of the soul. And when a woman suppresses her feminine essence, it is not her personality that suffers, it is her soul. Think about your life. Has there ever been a moment where you held back tears because you were afraid of seeming weak? A time when you felt something deeply, but told yourself to just move on. A moment when you wanted to be held, but instead chose to act like nothing mattered. These are not random habits. These are survival patterns born from early wounds, and they come at a great cost: your connection to your own energy. Many women were scolded for crying too much, told they were too sensitive, or punished for daydreaming. Over time, they learned to mistrust their own instincts. They learned to replace emotion with reason, presence with performance. And little by little, their feminine energy, once free and natural, became something hidden, something feared, something that only emerged in safe places, if it ever emerged at all. Jung said that the most wounded part of the psyche is often the one most in need of love. And for many women, that wounded part is their feminine energy, not because they were born lacking, but because they were taught that being feminine was unsafe. The world said, "You're too much," so they shrank. The world said, "Don't be emotional," so they armored up. But what no one said was this: your softness is your superpower. Your receptivity is sacred. The feminine doesn't disappear under pressure. It retreats. It finds a quiet place inside, waiting for the day it is safe enough to rise again. Like a stream that reroutes itself around a mountain, your essence adapts. You keep flowing, but in smaller ways, quieter ways, until one day you forget what it was like to feel fully alive, and you wonder, when did I become so numb, so tense, so tired? Jung believed that every archetype has a shadow, and the shadow of the feminine is the belief that softness makes you weak, that needing others makes you powerless, that your intuition is irrational. These are lies inherited from a culture that fears depth, and so women try to live from the mind alone, ignoring the messages of their bodies, hearts, and dreams. But the body remembers, the soul remembers, and eventually the ache to return becomes louder than the fear of being seen. To reclaim your feminine energy, you must learn to feel again, not just the good feelings, all of them. You must let yourself cry, rage, rest, laugh, create, and collapse. You must hold the broken parts without needing to fix them. You must stop performing for approval and begin practicing presence for yourself with yourself, not as a task, but as a sacred act. Imagine a stream, long blocked by stones and debris. At first, it trickles, uncertain, but as the barriers are slowly removed, it begins to flow again, stronger, clearer, more vibrant. This is your feminine energy. It is not something to be built. It is something to be unblocked. And the first stone to remove is shame. The shame of being sensitive. The shame of needing love. The shame of not being perfect. The feminine thrives in softness, in trust, in surrender. But how can you surrender when you've only ever been taught to control? How can you trust when no one ever protected your heart? This is why healing the inner child is the key, because she is the keeper of your original energy. She remembers what it was like to live without filters, and she is the one who can show you the way back. The modern world tells women to be everything: strong but graceful, successful but humble, beautiful but not vain. And in the process of trying to be it all, many women forget who they truly are. But Jung reminds us, the goal is not perfection. It is integration. You do not need to be better, you need to be whole. And wholeness means welcoming back the girl who still lives inside you. That girl, the one who once danced, dreamed, and wept without shame, is not a relic of your past. She is the doorway to your essence. When you let her speak again, when you honor her emotions, instead of silencing them, you begin to remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. Let this be your invitation to soften, to open, to return. Not to some ideal version of womanhood, but to your own soul, the one that was always there, waiting for the day you'd come back. Carl Jung never taught us to aim for perfection. In fact, he warned against it. What he asked of us was something far more courageous: to become whole, to embrace not only the light, but the shadow, not only the strength, but the fragility, not only the confident self we show the world, but also the trembling voice that still lives inside. This process of becoming whole is what he called individuation, the sacred unfolding of the soul toward its true nature. Individuation is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world asked you to become someone else. It is about peeling away the masks, the armor, the roles, the expectations, and finding what lies beneath. And for so many women, what lies beneath is a little girl who was once whole, but was never fully welcomed. Not because she was wrong, but because she was real. She felt too deeply. She spoke truths others weren't ready to hear. She cried when others expected composure. She dreamed wildly and dared to love without restraint. But when the world said, "Be quieter, be less, be more useful," she learned to shrink. And now, years later, the woman wonders why she feels so detached from herself, so exhausted, so unsure of what she truly needs. The answer is simple but profound. The child was never healed, only hidden. Jung taught that healing begins not by striving upward, but by descending inward. The soul does not bloom in avoidance. It flourishes in confrontation. You must go down, into the roots, where the pain began, where the fragments scattered. You must meet the parts of yourself that you disowned, the voices you silenced, the instincts you doubted. And when you do, you will find that they were never broken. They were simply waiting to be loved back into belonging. Many women live fragmented lives, not because they are weak, but because they were taught to disconnect from their own pain, from their own needs, from their own wisdom. They spend their energy trying to become someone the world will approve of, while their inner life whispers, "Please come back to me." And yet they ignore it, fearing what they'll find if they stop running. But the truth is, that whisper is not your enemy. It is your invitation. It is your soul calling you home. And this journey is not linear. There will be moments of confusion, times when you feel lost, days when you grieve the versions of yourself you once had to become to survive. Jung called this the symbolic death, the death of the false self, so that the true self can rise. You may find yourself standing in the in-between, not who you used to be, and not yet who you're becoming. And that space is sacred. That disorientation is not failure, it is transformation. Like a forest in winter, quiet, still, and seemingly lifeless, something deep is stirring beneath the surface. Something ancient and holy is reawakening. And when that moment comes, when you begin to feel not better, but more whole, you'll notice that your needs shift. You no longer crave validation the way you once did. You no longer chase love like a starving child. You no longer fear solitude, because in your own company, you have found peace. This is the quiet victory of individuation, not a loud applause, but a deep inner stillness, the kind that no one can give you and no one can take away. Jung believed that this path is not for the faint of heart, but it is the only path that leads to authenticity. And authenticity is not perfection. It is contradiction. It is beauty and rage, silence and expression, grace and grief, all allowed to coexist in one body, one soul. You do not become authentic by choosing only the polished parts. You become authentic by embracing everything you are. When a woman reclaims her wholeness, the world around her may not understand, but her soul will. She will no longer smile when she wants to cry, no longer stay silent when her truth is roaring, no longer abandon herself just to keep the peace, because now she knows there is a deeper peace in being true than in being accepted. And perhaps the most powerful shift of all is this: she stops chasing love that requires her to abandon herself. She stops yearning for mirrors that only reflect her wound. She begins to attract people, places, and experiences that match her new frequency, the frequency of someone who has come home to herself. Let this be the moment where you stop trying to fix what was never broken and begin listening to the parts of you that only ever wanted to be heard. You do not need to become anyone else. You only need to become you, the you that existed before shame took hold, before silence became your survival, before you forgot how to feel. This is not a destination. It is a devotion, a daily choosing to meet yourself with honesty, a commitment to live from your center, not from the voices of the past or the pressures of the world. You are not here to perform. You are here to remember, and the more you return to yourself, the more the feminine begins to rise again, not as an act, but as a truth. In the language of Jung, individuation is not becoming good enough. It is becoming whole enough to hold all of you, the child and the woman, the wounded and the wise, the afraid and the free. All of it is you, and none of it needs to be erased, only embraced. Before you can become whole, you must meet the one within you who was forgotten, not in thought, but in presence, not as a symbol, but as a real, breathing part of your psyche. Jung believed the inner child is not merely a concept, it is an archetype, a force within the unconscious that continues to shape your life from the shadows. And healing begins the moment you give her form, a name, a face, when you choose to see her, not as a version of the past, but as a soul still living within your present. The first step is gentle recognition. Find a photograph of yourself as a child. Choose one that stirs something tender inside, a faint smile, wide eyes, or an expression that speaks of innocence and wonder. Sit with that image. Look into her eyes and breathe. This is not just a girl you once were. This is someone who still feels, still waits, still aches to be held. Allow the questions to arise. What did she dream about? What made her feel safe? What broke her heart? Let your adult self pause, not to judge or analyze, but to listen. Write a letter to her, not from your intellect, but from your soul. Speak the words she always longed to hear. You are not too much. You are precious. I see you now. I will not leave you again. These words are more than healing gestures. They are contracts, invitations for lost parts of your being to return. Healing the inner child is not about digging through old pain for the sake of suffering. It is about witnessing the parts of you that were once unseen. Jung taught that the unconscious holds everything that was once too difficult to feel. And when you make space for that child to speak again, you begin the process of integration, bringing light into the shadows. The second step is listening. In quiet moments, close your eyes, place your hand over your heart, and invite her forward. She might not come quickly. She might hesitate, but trust that she hears you. Ask her, "What do you need from me right now?" And then wait. Maybe she needs comfort. Maybe she needs play. Maybe she just needs to be allowed to cry without being told to stop. Whatever she reveals, write it down. Don't edit. Don't filter. Let her speak through feeling, through memory, through intuition. What you are doing in these moments is building a bridge between who you are and who you once were, between the woman who learned to cope and the girl who never should have had to. And as you walk this bridge, you bring your fragmented soul back together. Jung called this a reconciliation with the self, the reuniting of opposites, of past and present, of outer image and inner truth. Next comes nurturing. Many of us were not given the care we needed as children, not because our caregivers were evil, but because they were wounded too. And so, we learn to mother ourselves through silence, pressure, perfectionism. But the inner child doesn't need more pressure. She needs gentleness. It's time for you to become the mother she never had. Start with your inner voice. How do you speak to yourself when you fail? When you feel insecure? When you're tired? Would you speak to a scared little girl the same way? Likely not. Then why do we continue to speak to ourselves with coldness? It's time to rewrite the tone. Replace punishment with patience. Replace shame with soothing. Tell her, you're allowed to rest. You're allowed to be sad. You are loved, even now, and mean it. This practice is not self-indulgence. It is self-repair. Jung knew that the psyche must be held with care, or else it fractures in silence. Becoming your own nurturer is a radical act of inner alchemy. As you become kinder to the girl within, you change the very texture of your emotional reality. You begin to soften, not just toward yourself, but toward life. And then, with quiet reverence, begin to honor your feminine essence. Carve out sacred moments, unstructured, intuitive, unproductive, in the best possible way. Ask yourself, what would feel nourishing today? Not what is expected of me, not what I should be doing, but what would awaken joy? It could be dancing barefoot, sketching without a plan, lying on the floor listening to music that stirs something ancient inside you. These small acts are not trivial. They are rituals. Each one is a key, unlocking the door back to your truth. Jung taught that our instincts are not distractions. They are messengers from the self. When you follow them with trust, you begin to remember who you were before the masks, before the roles, before the world demanded you be useful. Do not underestimate the power of play. Revisit the simple things you loved as a child, singing to yourself, making up stories, painting with your fingers. These are not childish. They are sacred. They are the language your soul spoke before it was translated into duty. Let them speak again. Let your inner child lead. She remembers what it feels like to be whole. In reclaiming joy, you will meet resistance. Guilt may rise. The voice that says, "You haven't earned this yet," that voice is not truth. It is an echo of an old wound. Sit with it. Thank it for trying to protect you. Then release it and choose joy anyway. Not because you've earned it, but because your soul was made for it. You are not weak for needing this. You are not selfish for longing to feel free again. You are simply remembering the shape of your original self. And she is not gone. She is waiting. In the quiet, in the colors, in the laughter, in the places you forgot to look. Let this be the beginning of your return, not to a past self, but to a truer one. The self that never stopped waiting for your love. Beneath many of our adult fears lies an ancient wound, the fear of rejection. It doesn't always announce itself clearly. It hides beneath overachievement, emotional detachment, perfectionism, and people-pleasing. And though it wears many faces, it traces back to one origin. The moment you felt that being your true self was not enough to be loved. Carl Jung taught that what is rejected from the outside is buried within the shadow. And the child, unable to separate truth from trauma, internalizes this wound. She does not think, they could not love me because of their own pain. She thinks, I must be unlovable. That thought becomes a belief. That belief becomes a pattern. And that pattern begins to run her life. You may find yourself over-explaining your emotions, apologizing for your existence, walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting others. You may smile while your heart aches, nod when you want to scream, stay when you want to leave. Not because you are weak, but because, long ago, you learned that authenticity leads to loss. And so you learn to edit yourself to survive. This is the rejection wound. The deep unconscious belief that who you really are is too much, too sensitive, too flawed. That you must earn affection, minimize your needs, and stay agreeable in order to be loved. But the truth is, your worth was never conditional. It was never meant to be measured by someone else's ability to recognize it. Jung believed that when we begin to make the unconscious conscious, we stop living as victims of our past. We start choosing instead of repeating. And to heal the rejection wound, we must first revisit the places where it began. Close your eyes. Remember a moment, perhaps from childhood, when you felt dismissed, ignored, or unloved. Let the memory rise without judgment. Then ask yourself gently, did that moment truly define who I am? You will find that it didn't. It defined how others saw you, but not the truth of your soul. Rejection is not always about your worth. It is often a reflection of another's wound. Their inability to love you had nothing to do with your lovability. And when you begin to separate your identity from their pain, you begin to reclaim the power they unknowingly took. This reclamation is not loud. It is quiet. It happens in moments where you choose to speak when you would have stayed silent, when you rest instead of proving yourself, when you stop chasing those who do not see you, and turn inward with tenderness instead. These choices are small rebellions and sacred acts of self-trust. The inner child, still aching from that early rejection, doesn't need you to convince her she's good enough. She needs you to believe it for her. She needs you to say, you were never too much. You were always worthy of love, even when others couldn't give it. And she needs you to stop handing your worth to people who cannot hold it. Jung taught that the process of healing is not linear, and often begins with mourning, not of who you were, but of who you pretended to be to feel safe. It may hurt to realize how much of your life was shaped by the fear of being left behind. But it will also set you free, because now you have the power to choose differently. Let yourself grieve the masks you wore, the spaces where you were invisible, the people you had to shrink for. Let yourself feel the sadness, not to drown in it, but to release it, because underneath that sadness is clarity. You are not here to be tolerated. You are here to be loved for who you are. You may have spent years waiting for someone to finally choose you, but the moment you choose yourself, the game changes. You stop settling, you stop begging, you stop bending, and you start rising, not in arrogance, but in reverence for the soul you've neglected for too long. Imagine a little girl standing at the edge of a field, unsure if she's allowed to run free again. You walk toward her, take her hand, and whisper, "You don't need permission anymore." That's what healing looks like. It's not always grand or poetic. Sometimes it's just remembering that you're allowed to take up space, to need, to feel, to want, to be. And then something subtle shifts. You begin to feel differently in your own body. More at home, less at war. You begin to trust your instincts again. You begin to soften, not because you're weak, but because you are finally safe. Rejection no longer holds power when you stop abandoning yourself. The next time you feel unwanted, take a breath and remind yourself, I am not who they see. I am who I choose to be. This is the start of self-belonging, the foundation of feminine healing. It is the quiet knowing that love, approval, and acceptance are not goals to chase, but truths to return to. Let yourself come home to this truth. You were never meant to fit into places that couldn't hold your light, and you do not need to prove your worth to be worthy. You only need to remember what your soul never forgot. You are already enough. To reclaim your feminine energy is not to learn something new. It is to remember what was once so natural that it didn't need explanation. The feminine essence is not something you build. It's something you uncover. And the key to this hidden treasure lies in a place most women forget to search, in the spontaneous, untamed, feeling-filled heart of the little girl they once were. Carl Jung spoke often of the inner child as the symbol of renewal. Not a weakness, not an inconvenience, but the very blueprint of the self. He saw this archetype not only as the gatekeeper to healing, but as the source of vitality, imagination, and spiritual return. So if you feel disconnected from your feminine energy, it's not because you've lost it. It's because she, the girl inside, has not been given permission to live again. Think back. Was there a time when you laughed until your stomach ached? When you sang off-key just because it made you feel free? When you painted, played dress-up, told stories, or danced in your room with abandon? Those moments weren't useless. They were sacred. They were your feminine energy in its raw, undisturbed form. But somewhere along the way, someone told you to stop. Maybe they didn't say it outright. Maybe they just rolled their eyes. Maybe they told you to be more serious, more appropriate, more realistic. So you tucked that vibrant girl away. And now, as a woman, you may feel numb, tired, uninspired, not because life is dull, but because the part of you that made it radiant hasn't been invited back. The inner child is not just a memory. She's an oracle. She remembers the version of you that didn't need validation to feel worthy. She remembers the joy that didn't come from accomplishments, the beauty that didn't come from mirrors, the self-worth that didn't require comparison. If you feel disconnected from your feminine flow, it's not because you're broken. It's because you've been too busy surviving to remember how to feel. Jung warned that when instincts are ignored, the psyche becomes rigid, life turns gray, the body tightens, the soul becomes weary. The cure is not another task. It's a return to softness, a reconnection with instinct, with imagination, with spontaneity. These are not luxuries. They are lifelines. So here is your invitation. Make a list of the things that once made you feel alive. Skip the filters. Let it flow. Skipping rope, drawing dragons, running through fields, making up stories, singing to yourself, dressing in wild colors. Write it all. Then choose one. And do it this week. Not because it's useful, but because your soul is hungry for it. This may feel strange at first. You may hear the old voice rise. This is childish. You don't have time. This doesn't matter. But that voice is not your truth. That voice belongs to the wound. And healing means doing the very thing the wound said you couldn't. It means trusting joy again. There is a quiet power that comes from re-inhabiting your playful self. You begin to walk differently, speak differently. You smile for no reason. You take up space without apology. You create without fear of judgment. You begin to feel yourself soften, and something ancient within you exhales. This is the return of the feminine. Let go of the idea that you must earn this softness. You don't. Your worth is not transactional. It is existential. And the more you let the inner child breathe again, the more you tap into your feminine power, the kind that doesn't scream or chase, but magnetizes, the kind that doesn't control but simply is. And this essence isn't always sweet and silent. Sometimes she is wild, primal, untamed. Sometimes she roars with truth. Sometimes she dances under the moonlight alone. And when that side of you comes alive again, you are no longer performing womanhood. You are embodying soulhood. Healing the inner child doesn't just soothe old pain. It awakens sacred possibility. The more you listen to her, the more you remember your original rhythm. You stop forcing. You stop proving. You stop overthinking every word because your energy begins to speak louder than anything you could ever say. The woman who has made peace with her inner girl becomes magnetic, not because she's perfect, but because she's whole. She carries a softness that isn't weakness, it's wisdom. A playfulness that isn't naive, it's freedom. A tenderness that doesn't beg, it invites. Let yourself move toward this remembrance, not as a goal, but as a ritual. Let every smile, every creative act, every unedited emotion be a prayer to the self. Jung knew that the feminine soul awakens when we stop fearing the child within, because she is the bridge. She is the gatekeeper, and through her, you return to life, not as you were told to live it, but as you were always meant to. From a very young age, many women are taught to perform. Not in the theatrical sense, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. Be polite, be pleasant, be agreeable. And over time, These small performances become armor. The soul begins to believe that being fully seen is dangerous, that to express too much, feel too deeply, or take up too much space is to risk rejection. And so she shrinks, one quiet decision at a time. Carl Jung warned that the persona, the mask we wear for the world, can become a prison when we confuse it for our true self. We begin to live as the performance, we laugh at jokes we don't find funny, we stay silent when we want to scream, we dress, speak, and even love in ways that make us digestible. But deep beneath this polished exterior is a part of us that is suffocating. That suffocated part is not weak, it's wild. It is the self you were before you were domesticated, and she does not want to be tamed. She wants to be witnessed, but witnessing requires risk. To be seen means to be vulnerable. It means letting the mask fall, and that feels terrifying if the only safety you've ever known came from being acceptable. So ask yourself gently, where in my life do I still feel the need to shrink? Is it when you speak your truth, when you express desire, when you dress for yourself and not for approval? Do you laugh quieter so others won't stare? Do you soften your strength so no one feels threatened? These are not harmless choices. These are small betrayals. And over time, they create an inner world that is both quiet and deeply lonely. The truth is, judgment is not the enemy. Self-abandonment is. Jung believed that individuation requires confronting our fear of not belonging, because only then can we discover a deeper belonging, the one that comes from self-acceptance. You were not born to blend in. You were born to live in the full, vibrant, emotional color of your own truth. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins with a whisper. A choice to show up as yourself in one small way. Maybe you dance in your kitchen even if someone's watching. Maybe you cry without apologizing. Maybe you say what you mean even if your voice shakes. These are not acts of rebellion. They are acts of reunion. The inner child was never afraid of being herself. She wore costumes, not masks. She played freely, sang loudly, loved openly. She didn't ask for permission to shine. She just did. And when you allow her to return, you awaken a kind of aliveness that cannot be faked, an energy that draws others in. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Let that authenticity rise. Slowly, gently. Let it spill into your voice, your art, your relationships. The more you let yourself be seen, the more you teach your nervous system that it is safe to exist without a mask, that it is safe to speak without filtering, to feel without explaining, to shine without dimming. Jung taught that the journey to wholeness is not about being better. It's about being more you. And every time you choose truth over performance, you dissolve a little more of the false self. The part that was built to survive, yes, but was never meant to lead. This doesn't mean you'll never feel fear. You will, but you'll walk through it with compassion. You'll speak even if your voice trembles. You'll show up even if someone doesn't understand you. Because now, your worth is no longer up for debate. It is grounded in the unshakable knowing that you are allowed to exist as you are. There is a sacred shift that happens when you stop hiding, not because someone gave you permission, but because you realized you don't need it. You are the gatekeeper now, the protector, the liberator. And as you walk in your truth, you become a mirror for others still living behind their masks. Let yourself be that mirror. Not by trying to convince, but simply by being. Your energy will do the rest. Because nothing is more magnetic than a woman who has made peace with being seen. Even in her rawness, even in her softness, even in her contradiction. So this is your invitation. Stop shrinking. Stop rehearsing. Stop seeking safety and silence. You do not have to disappear to be loved. You do not have to perform to be wanted. You only need to remember who you were before fear told you to hide. And when you do, when you allow your whole self to rise, life begins to respond differently. People see you differently. You see yourself differently. Not as a version to improve, but as a soul returning to its original frequency, whole, radiant, and unapologetically real. At the end of every spiritual journey, there is not a final achievement, only a sacred remembering, a return, not to a former version of yourself, but to the truest version, the one who existed before the world asked you to change, before the wounds, before the masks. Carl Jung believed that healing is less about learning and more about uncovering what has always lived within you, whole, wild, wise, and waiting. And now, you are ready to remember joy, not the conditional kind that requires accomplishment or approval, but the kind that rises without explanation. The kind that moves through you like light through stained glass. The kind that your inner child once knew instinctively before she was told to be quiet, good, or useful. This joy is not frivolous. It is not immature. It is not silly. It is sacred. Jung said that play is the highest form of individuation because it emerges from the self without concern for outcomes. It flows from the soul like a river, asking nothing but presence. And so many women have lost access to this current, not because it dried up, but because it was buried under shame, productivity, and fear. You were taught that joy must be earned, that you are only allowed to feel good once the checklist is finished, once others are satisfied, once the outer image is intact. But your soul does not follow that logic. Your soul wants to be nourished now, not later, not when it's convenient, not when it makes sense, now. So, take a breath. Ask yourself, not your mind, but your body, your heart. What brings me joy? Not usefulness, not status, not what looks good, but what makes me feel alive. Is it painting, even if no one sees, singing, even off-key, curling up with a book that makes your heart ache in the best way, dancing with your eyes closed, laughing until you can't breathe? Write these things down. Let them be your medicine. Choose one. Do it. Not because it serves anyone else, but because it feeds you. Because your inner child has waited long enough to feel free again. And if guilt arises, as it often will, place your hand on your heart and say, I am allowed to enjoy being alive. This is not just emotional wellness. It is spiritual reclamation. It is how you tell your younger self, you are safe now. It is how you whisper to your body, you don't need to brace anymore. And in that moment, something ancient begins to thaw. Something that's been frozen for years begins to move again. Fluid, soft. Jung taught that when we integrate the parts of ourselves we've rejected, we no longer live in fragments. We live in truth. That truth doesn't shout, it hums. It radiates, it breathes. And the woman who has found it is unmistakable. Not because she is the loudest in the room, but because her energy speaks with quiet confidence. I am here. I am whole. I remember who I am. You do not have to force your feminine energy to return. She is not lost. She is waiting. In your breath, in your stillness, in your softness, in your joy. You don't need to earn her. You only need to make space for her. She comes when you feel safe, when you stop rushing, when you finally realize you are allowed to be exactly as you are. So let her return. Let the inner girl run barefoot through your soul again. Let her cry when she needs to. Let her laugh when she wants to. Let her be angry, gentle, wild, quiet. Let her be everything she once was before the world taught her to doubt it. And as you let her live, something extraordinary happens. You don't just heal, you remember. You remember that you were never meant to live behind a mask. That your emotions are not liabilities, they are guides. That your softness is not your weakness, it is your superpower. And that your presence, your joy, your truth, is more than enough. You are no longer seeking permission. You are no longer asking, am I too much? You are walking in your fullness. Not perfectly, not always gracefully, but truthfully. And that is more than enough. This is the journey. Carl Jung dedicated his life to understanding, not a journey of self-improvement, but of self-return. And you are now walking that path. Every breath, every truth, every act of self-compassion is a step home. Let today be the day you stop chasing love, success, or worth, and start embodying it. Let today be the day you say, I am no longer abandoning myself. Because when you return to her, the little girl within, you awaken the woman you were always meant to be. And she is radiant.